That's okay, but we want to welcome everybody tonight. And again, I'm very excited to be able to talk to you tonight about and teach to you about Psalms. But before we do that, let's do a little bit in the news and what's happening there. We have one category that's called the New World Order, as we see things kind of funneling together. So this one's under that, and it's Save the Planet, Don't Have Kids. Now, you heard me talk last week about one of the Avengers movies, and I was talking about population control. Just to let you know that this is a subculture that's happening in our world. Listen to this. Democratic candidate wants tax on parents with more than 2 kids. A Democratic congressional candidate in Pennsylvania has desires to tax parents who have more than 2 children as irresponsible breeders. Scott Wallace is a population control zealot who has donated over $7 million to population control groups. Wallace is also supported and endorsed by both Planned Parenthood, no wonder, and NOW, which is the National Organization for Women. According to the Daily Wire, Wallace, a millionaire and a Democrat who believes in taxing families with more than 2 kids for being privileged, also believes that the tax would be on the privilege of irresponsible breeding. He goes on to say this. It says, Wallace's fund, which is Wallace Global Fund, gave $200,000 to the Center for the Advancements of Steady State Economy. It's called CAS in 2012. CAS is an environmentalist group that seeks economic growth as undesirable. Of course, you have that with climate change. It goes in hand in hand. We're putting too much carbons into the atmosphere, so we have to control the population. It says the group supports an economy with stable or mildly fluctuating levels and a society with equal birth and death rates. We do not have that. One of the board members, as a matter of fact, calls this stagnant state of affairs maturing. CAS still supports zero population growth, and executive board member Herman Daly has pushed for reproduction licenses. This means you have to get a license to have children. Now, it's bad enough you got to get a license to have a car and to drive a car, but now you have to have a license to procreate. Just permission from the government to have children. The bureaucratic control over birth would allow women to have only 2 children unless they buy the license for more children from other women who don't want to reproduce. How many of you think that this is just like really kind of weird? Anyway, it goes on. If you've ever wondered how close we are to totalitarianism, you no longer have to. It's right around the corner. Abortion and population control movements can be traced back to the horrific racism of the early eugenics movement, where activists like Margaret Sanger call for more babies for the fit and less for the unfit. So we're watching our society push this way. They want to have controlled population, and specifically, they want to bless and I use that word bless because that's what they want to do, the rich at the expense of the poor. So the poor people will be selling their licenses, and it's really a ridiculous thing. I hope it doesn't go through in Pennsylvania, although I don't know. I've been from Pennsylvania, and trust me, anything goes up there. Here you go. Your smart TV is watching you. I think I've lost my little pointer here, so let me get that if I can. So we've been telling you about this for a while, but this one kind of is an eye-opener. It tells you how they're doing it. So most of us have come to expect some level of monitoring on our internet security and activities, but tech giants such as Google and Facebook are able to provide free searches and social networks in exchange for targeted ads. So you get your free service in Facebook and Google because they get ads. Those ads give them revenue. So that's basically why you are able to go onto Facebook free. Until a few short years ago, the television was a passive receiver. You got your views from the television coming in through a cable or coming in through some type of antenna. It was a one-way street. That is no longer true today. I want you to understand, right now we know that as it turns out, there's about 4,000 word policy if you have a smart TV. Listen, 45% of Americans have smart TVs. And if you have a smart TV, 45% of households in America, here's how they watch us. And now listen, during setup of that TV, most owners simply click agree to any long, complicated legal forms that appear on the screen. As it turns out, one of those is a 4,000 word privacy policy and a 6,500 word long term of service agreement from a company called Samba TV that asks viewers to agree to have their viewing habits closely monitored. So if you have a smart TV, you have already done that. And by the way, maybe if you have a Sony, if you have a Sharp, a TCL, or a Philips, they all come pre-programmed with Samba TV monitor software. So at the end of 2016, the company claimed that around 90% of consumers were opting in for this monitoring because we don't know what we're doing. We set up a TV and just click agree, and we're agreeing for them to be able to monitor us. Now, that may sound like it's innocuous, but it's not. Rather than directly selling the viewer data to collect, Samba TV collects all your viewer data, instead carefully analyzes the content of the individual views, and then directs targeted ads to the device as well as other internet-connected devices in the home. Citibank, JetBlue, Expedia all pay millions of dollars to have their ads appear on the devices of consumers who have just watched the Travel Channel or some other financial news. So that's how they do it. Now listen closely because you'll hear it a little bit better. The tracking can even differentiate among specific programming content, whether it's liberal or conservative, to direct the most effective ads across all the devices. Have you ever watched a program on television and a few hours later see an advertisement for something related on your smartphone or your desktop computer? Raise your hand. That's because your TV told it to do that. It's monitoring you. And yet that is far from the only way in which smart TVs are now being employed to monitor and track their viewers. Apart from the obvious potential of the built-in microphones that can be remotely activated, Facebook has patented an ingenious way to monitor our behavior through supersonic trigger sounds. Though the company claims it has not employed the feature yet, the potential is alarming. With this monitoring system, advertising companies would place a high-pitched sonic code, sort of like a Morse code, outside the range of human hearing into commercials. So when you're watching TV and a commercial comes on, there's a high-pitched sound that comes out that you don't hear. Facebook apps such as Messenger, already installed on hundreds of millions of smartphones, would be able to detect this code, cause the device to begin recording, and then transmit that data, audio recordings, from inside the user's home back to the advertising companies. So if you really understand what this is that it's already in your TV, and so when a commercial comes on, there is something triggered that puts an ultra frequency that you can't hear. As that ultra frequency does, it turns on the listening devices in your TV, and those listening devices bring that back to those companies. So why go through all the trouble? For a very simple reason. Advertisers want to know whether people are muting their commercials or leaving the room when they come on. The system is reported to be sensitive enough to determine whether someone is moving across a room, if other ambient noises are drowning out the commercial, or whether conversation includes elements of the ad, thus making an effective ad campaign. So they're listening to you talking about the ad. So if they're listening to you talking about the ad, how many of you know they can listen to you talking about anything? And that's what it is. Now just pause for a moment and think about the implications of this technology. Corporations can secretly listen to everything you say in your house. Intelligent signals that will activate remote listening devices on our cell phones, record the conversations in the privacy of our homes, and then send that data to those faceless corporation giants, all without you or me knowing the informed consent. Knowing or having informed consent. It's difficult to imagine how the system would not be abused either by companies themselves or the government. Our lives are all a little more uncomplicated by having smart devices, we know that. But we're giving something up in the process. We're giving up our individual security in the process. Let me give you a little bit more that's going on. And by the way, that's a pretty scary one when you think about it. This says, top CIA expert, China is waging a quiet Cold War against the United States. And so according to a top CIA agent, China is waging a quiet Cold War against the United States. Although China doesn't really want a war with the U.S., they're quietly preparing and undermining the nation in ways that aren't obvious to everyone else, says Michael Collins, Deputy Assistant Director of the CIA's East Asia Mission Center. So what it's saying is this. We know that China is building up its military. We know that China is building up almost everything in its country. Marcel Lettre, former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, said China has the second largest defense budget in the world, the largest standing army of ground forces, larger than ours obviously, the third largest air force, and a navy of 300 ships and over 60 submarines. So I told you a long time ago about the Thucydides effect. Thucydides was actually he was a prophet, a poet, and he was also a observer of warfare back in Greece, 300 BC. And he knew that Athens was the major city, they were city-states, and it ruled Greece. Sparta was up and coming, but Athens was losing its control, so Sparta was just knocking at the door. Thucydides said that given enough time, any number one power will always have a secondary power pushing to be number one. The man who has written the book on Thucydides has plotted all the world movements, the world main movements in the world for about 7 major ones, and every one of them was a takeover of who was number one. So I said all that to say this, just confirming this report. America's been number one for a long, long time. Unfortunately, thanks to Obama, he rested on his laurels and a lot of time and defunded our military. And so we know now China, President Xi Jinping, who voted himself in forever, by the way, is now pushing on China to be a world power. And all you have to do is read Revelation to understand that they're called the kings of the East. They will actually come and they will threaten Israel. And so we're watching something happen that Ezekiel has talked about, we're watching something happen that John talked about, and that you're seeing in your news. So it's no news to me that that's happening, but obviously for some people it is. Let me give you a little bit more. Theresa May's government implodes as the 9th MP resigns over a soft Brexit plan. So England has voted to come out of the European Union, but the Prime Minister right now, Theresa May, is dragging her feet. So she's watching cabinet members of her parliament start to resign. So it looks like there's going to be some big trouble in England come very, very soon. Let me give you a little bit more as we go to Israel and tell you what's happening there. That is Muhammad Abbas. This Palestinian leader is being pushed. He's being pushed by Hamas, and on Monday he vowed that he would not cut payments to families of terrorists, despite Israeli law punishing his government for doing so. So out of their budget, what he does, by the way, let me back up. The Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, recently enacted a law to financially penalize the PA for paying stipends to terrorists. They collect taxes for some of them, and they're not going to give them their taxes, and they're not going to give them the revenue from it if they keep paying terrorists. So he said, we don't care what you do, we're going to pay terrorists with our last penny. That's what he says. And let me tell you how lucrative it is for a terrorist. There's 40% unemployment in the Palestinian areas. These people make nothing. They're starving to death. If somebody kills an Israeli or is in prison because they've hurt an Israeli, they get paid, their family gets paid, their house gets paid off, and they get paid a stipend every single year. They get money for the rest of their lives, and it's about 5 times the annual salary of anyone working in the Palestinian areas. So last year they paid $330 million out of their budget. So he's saying we are not going to stop that. Can you imagine the international regime of the UN is not saying anything about that. This is promoting terrorism. Can you imagine if I said to you, for every single one of you that goes out and kills an Israeli tonight, if you go over to Israel and you kill one, I'm going to pay for your family for the rest of their lives and pay off your house. How many know there's some people who are suicidal that would love to do that? There are people that have lost all hope and saying, well, I'm going to just take care of my family. So it's a really bad policy, and it amazes me that the world community says absolutely nothing about it. Let me tell you a little bit more about Israel and what's happening in there. This week, Israel shot down a Syrian warplane as the Golan frontier heats up. So let me give you the scenario because it gets lost in the sauce sometimes. We know that Syria had a Syrian jet come over a demilitarized zone in between the Golan, and I'll tell you this, the Golan is a buffer zone. Israel's on this side, Syria's on that side. It's a valley, and you have mountains on that side and mountains on this side. Those mountains you look at are the mountains of Syria. These are the mountains of Israel. Israel and Syria fought wars since 1967. That was their last war. And basically they fought across that divide. They have military posts, both sides do. Well, the rebels, now Syria's not fighting Israel, but the rebels that are fighting the Assad regime have taken those posts that used to be going against Israel up in the height. It's very close to the Israeli border. So a Syrian jet trying to take out the rebels, so they said, flew over those bases and flew 1 mile into Israeli Air Force, Israeli territory. Now here's the deal. Israel's not stupid. They understand that Syria hates them. They understand that Iran is there and they hate them. So they're very well prepared. So they warned the pilots of this jet coming over that they were in Israeli airspace. Warned them from what I found 15 minutes. Kept giving them warnings. And then they shot 2 Patriot missiles and took them down. And so Israel is very prepared to defend themselves. And I wanted you to know that. So whenever you hear it on the news that Israel shot down a jet, it wasn't because they just decided to shoot one down. They know that that's a proxy war that's looking eventually to go their way. Let me give you a little bit about economy, what's happening here. 7 times since the 1960s, we've seen what's called a yield curve. Now again, this is very complex, so I want to give you this in kind of bite-sized forms. Invert. This curve inverts. It goes the opposite way. And in each of those 7 instances, an economic recession in the United States has followed. Every single one. So it's starting to invert right now. Today, the yield curve is the flattest it's been in 11 years, and many analysts believe that we were going to see an inversion before the end of 2018. If an inversion does take place, experts will be all over the mainstream media warning about an imminent recession. Unfortunately, most Americans don't understand these things, and when they hear terms like yield curve, they tend to quickly tune out. So this article is wanting to define what a yield curve is and why it's so important and why another U.S. recession may be rapidly approaching. So I read the whole article, and it's as clear as mud. So I'm going to tell you what it means. I'm going to break it down for you. The yield curve is based on Treasury notes. The United States gives Treasury notes that pay an interest rate after 2 years, and then they give Treasury notes that pay an interest rate after 10 years. The difference between there is called the spread. And so if you get interest rates for a 2-year bond, Treasury note, that's going to be less interest than the 10-year. You get more interest the longer you put it in, just like a certificate of deposit. So they watch that spread. When that spread, it should be a pretty good spread to the upside. That's the curve going up. When that spread starts not to be that big, and it starts to be shortened, you get an inverse curve. We are in a spot where it's flat. That spread is not different from a 2-year to a 10-year. So what happens is once it starts going down, you're going to see banks not loaning money out. You're going to see mortgages getting shortened, and they're maybe even called back. They won't loan out mortgages. When that happens, they won't loan out to businesses. If they don't loan out to businesses, businesses will lay people off, and they won't expand their business. So you can see how a recession quickly follows. Well, what's happening is that curve is flat right now. That's the curve you're looking at right there. And basically, what's going to happen if it goes under and it does a negative yield curve, then you're going to see recession hit America. And let me tell you something, everybody who's going crazy on stock market right now, that's why a lot of people are coming out of the stocks, a lot of big people, because they're seeing this happen every time that happens, every single time, without miss, there's a recession. So I just want to let you know you heard it here. Wolf Blitzer should be telling you, but he has his head in the clouds someplace. All right, here you go. Let me give you another one. This, and I don't know if I even have this in here right here, or maybe later on, so I'll give it to you later on. Let me give you this one. We talk about war. We've been talking about the Gog and Magog war. This is a war that's going to come sometime either right before the rapture or right after the rapture. We don't know. There's a division on when it's going to come, but we're very close. Listen to it. This article writer says this: I was listening to the nationally syndicated radio program, and the host made an astonishing observation. She described a recent trip she took to Israel. She talked about looking over the border into Syria, just what I told you about from the Golan, looking over the border into Syria. Then she dropped a line that grabbed my attention. She said, when you look over the border today, you're not looking at Syria anymore. You're looking at Russia, Iran, and Turkey. This wasn't a religious broadcast. It was a secular political talk show. He says, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the host realized the true significance of her observation. I don't think she spoke from a perspective of Bible prophecy, and it made her statement even more powerful, because any objective observer has to agree with her. The nation of Syria no longer exists. Listen to what he says. It may exist in name, but that's it. What used to be Syria has been carved up by 3 nations, by the way: Russia, and Iran, and Turkey is actually taking parts of the top of the northwestern part of it. And so anyway, it's divided by these 3 groups. And the 3 biggest ones are Russia, Iran, and Turkey. So why is this significant? It's significant because it sets the stage for an event the Bible prophesied 2,000 years ago, the Gog-Magog War. 26 centuries ago, Ezekiel described the last days alliance that would have invade Israel from the north. And by the way, this is all north of Israel. The Bible says a man named Gog will lead the massive invasion force. If it was today, that would be Putin. Here are the nations who will join Gog, followed by their modern day names. And I've given these before. Rosh is Russia. Magog is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. Don't ask me to say these again. And Afghanistan. Persia is Iran. Cush is Sudan. Put is Libya. Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah are Turkey. So if you notice anything, you're right. All those nations, the 3 most powerful, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, now reside in Syria. Now they're positioned on the north of it. It's actually the northeast of Israel. They have military forces camped on Israel's border, as I just told you, and not just any border, Israel's northern border. That's the Golan, it's the northern border. Ezekiel says this war will come from the north. That's where we're seeing all the tension. Remember, Ezekiel said Gog of Magog, invasive force, will come from the north. That's Ezekiel 38:15, by the way. So now we have 3 of the nations in Gog's invading force perched on Israel's northern border. Is that coincidence? I don't think so. The Bible foretold the exact scenario in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, which I suggest you read. Never, and I say never before, has this ever happened in the history of humanity. It's never happened that these 3 nations have come on board or on Israel's northern border. Let me just paraphrase some things that this is saying, and let me add a couple things. The big thing here that's making it more viable for Ezekiel's prophecy is Turkey. Turkey was an ally, it still is somewhat, of the United States. It's a member of NATO, the National Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO was formed to keep Russia from invading Europe. So Turkey is part of NATO. So Turkey now is leaving its democratic roots and it's going to an Islamic state. And so basically it's joining forces with Russia. It has signed several armistice agreements with Russia, economic agreements with Russia. So it's completing the puzzle to get us to that spot of Gog and Magog. So Russia signed a series of agreements enhancing their energy ties, including an agreement to build Turkey's first nuclear power plant. And in recent years, Turkey's domestic policies, historically secular in nature, have been heavily influenced by Islam. And that gives Turkey more than enough motive to join the Gog-Magog alliance. And by the way, all those nations I mentioned to you, Turkmenistan, all those nations are 90 to 98% Muslim. They're in this lower part of Russia. And here we are. Turkish President Recep Erdogan has consolidated power in Turkey. So what does it all mean? It means the stage is now set for the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And it means more events will begin to align with Ezekiel's account. Expect this alliance to get closer. Expect these nations, and once you start hearing, some of you in the news and you start hearing me say it, expect those nations to draw closer and closer. That will prove what we're talking about. So as these events take place, it means the world is drawing closer and closer to witnessing the war of Gog and Magog. That means that Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and the other nations in the Gog and Magog alliance will send an overwhelming invasion force against Israel. That's Ezekiel 38, 8, and 9. No other nation will come to Israel's defense, not even the United States. We will not come to their defense. Ezekiel 38 tells us that. But God will. This means he'll put his full power on display for the people of this world when he supernaturally destroys Israel's invaders, which Ezekiel says he will destroy every one of the invaders that come in from the north. So most of all, it means that we are in the last days. It means that we are very, very close. And so when I tell you all that, I'm telling you the second coming is near and the rapture of the church is even closer. Unfortunately, the church isn't preaching it anymore. They're not even preaching prophecy anymore. So we are living in it. And so we're watching people just turn blind eyes, and not you, but we're watching others turn blind eyes to that. Let me give you a little bit more of war. The Syrian army says it captures strategic hill overlooking Israeli border. These all kind of parallel to each other. The Syrian army has not captured that hill. That hill is still in rebel hands. They're saying they captured it so that Israel doesn't shoot down any more of their planes as they try to go there. Let me give you this one also. So we've been talking about transgenderism, and this is something that's happening all over the United States. Let me tell you why it's happening all over the United States. Transgender people are going into libraries because libraries are federally funded. And so the federal government is obviously pushing the transgender agenda, the liberal government that's there, who would be on that side of the government, the liberals. And so they would take funds away from those libraries. So a lot of those libraries have children's programs. Matter of fact, the library near us had a children's program not too long ago, I think it was last month, and they had some people reading stories, not these people, and they had some sleight of hand people that were there to entertain the kids during the summer. Well, this is what the LGBT and basically the transgender, not LGBT, but transgenders, part of the LGBT, are zeroing in on that little loophole. They're pushing themselves so that they can push the edges. So listen to this article. It's very, very good. And unfortunately, it's very graphic. I don't usually speak this way, but you're going to hear me say some things that I don't normally speak, but I have to say it because it's in the article. So 7 reasons why the transgender revolution will fail. This is written by a secular person, not a Christian. It's a secular article. He says, I earnestly hope and pray that every child and adult struggling with gender identity issues will find wholeness, peace, and happiness from the inside out. I earnestly hope and pray that we will live to see the day when every person who feels trapped inside a wrong body will find internal resolution without hormones and radical surgery. So he has a compassion, as we all should. At the same time, he says, I wholeheartedly oppose the transgender revolution, and I'm predicting right now that ultimately it will fail. And here's why. Number 1, the transgender revolution is oppressive. As referred to on July 16th on Lifestyle News, failing to refer to a gender-confused student, professor, or staffer by his or her preferred pronouns could become a fireball or expulsion worthy of offense at the University of Minnesota. I told you about that. You have to call them what they think they are, otherwise you'll be fired as a professor, according to proposed guidelines currently under consideration. So it's not enough to allow a biological male to identify as a female, hardly. Society must conform or else. If he now wants to be identified as a she, sometimes they want to be identified as a Z, XE, or a Z-E, and I'm really kind of messing up the alphabet right now with me, and you fail to use the right pronoun, you will be punished. It's already law in New York City, and Canada has taken steps to make this kind of enforced speech the law across the country. It cannot succeed in the long term. Society will push back. Now, I warn you, the next point is pretty graphic. Second, the transgender revolution is irrational. As a result of trans activism, tampons are now available in some college campus bathrooms. After all, we're told men menstruate as well as women. Yes, a woman who identifies as a man but still gets her monthly period is actually a menstruating man. And we're supposed to believe this nonsense, right? We're supposed to shake our heads and say, how quaint. Well, I don't think so. Recently, however, trans activists have taken things to a new depth of irrationality. Men who identify as women have declared that they get their time of the month also, just differently. You think? So other biological realities must now be redefined as well, and a monthly cycle is no longer a physical event. To quote Trans Girl directly, nobody teaches trans girls about our time. We just get these weird times where we're moody and crampy and sad and we don't know why, and we just chalk it up to another reason we're not good enough in life. How messed up can this be? So just so you all know, trans girls get their time of the month. Enough said. It's beyond irrational. Third, the transgender revolution is unhealthy. Trans advocates tell us the failure to diagnose and treat gender dysphoria will result in depression, suicide, or other forms of self-harm. Others would point to the high percentage of suicides after surgery, along with substantial numbers of people who experience sex change regret. But there's more to be concerned about. A recent headline on a gay website announced hormone therapy linked to dangerous health issues in trans women. This is on a headline on a gay website. So yes, researchers set out to examine heart and circulatory health in transgender people and found that transgender women face a greater chance of strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots compared to their non-transgender counterparts. You cannot go against God's order. You can't do it. Listen, and what about the kids who are put on hormone blockers before puberty, then put on lifelong regimen of hormone therapy? What will the effects be to them? 4, the transgender revolution is extreme. Scarlett Johansson, one of the biggest female names in the big screen, recently felt the wrath of the transgender activists, withdrawing her from her starring role as a trans man after protests. How dare a woman actor play the role of a trans man when there are plenty of trans men who can play that role? So they want to encapsulate everything. Actors actually supposed to act. I'm not crazy about her playing the role, but it's ridiculous in them telling them that they had to have a transgender man. 5, the transgender revolution is dangerous. When you insist that a biological male who identifies as a female has the right to use a woman's bathroom, locker room, and dressing room, you're asking for trouble. A headline from England states, transgender prisoner who was put in a female jail despite not having sexual change surgery, sexually assaulted 4 women inmates before being moved to a male prison. Come on. Really? Should we be surprised on that? 6, the transgender revolution is unnatural. There are fundamental, undeniable differences between men and women. Should we have to tell people that? Which is why there is an increasing pushback against biological males competing against biological females in all kinds of sports. 7, the transgender revolution is an attack on children. Trans advocates would tell us that they are helping children, that they are saving them many years of grief and pain and confusion. In reality, for every child they might help, and even that in a temporary, non-holistic way, they are confusing many more children, innocent, tender kids. As the Daily Mail says, are children as young as 11 really capable of making life-changing decisions about their gender? And of course the answer is absolutely not. The prefrontal cortex is not developed, doesn't develop till you're 21. We are playing with fire here, and there will be likely many, many casualties before we wake up. So he's saying, I think the revolution is going to back up on itself. And I agree with him 100%. I think what's going to happen is this thing's going to reach a limit, and then you're going to start seeing it go backwards. And thank God it's going to go backwards, because it needs to. All right, so let me give you this one. This happened yesterday. Facebook, how many of you heard of it? Listen to this. Here's what every major Wall Street analyst had to say about Facebook's plummeting stock. It nosedived. Facebook shares tanked after social media giants' report on daily active users fell short of expectations, and the company warned revenue growth would slow the rest of the year. As of Thursday morning, the Facebook stock was set for the worst day ever, with shares down nearly 20% in pre-market trading. I think it was something like $17 billion that they lost. JP Morgan is saying that the stock is overweight. Don't buy it. Everybody was talking about buying this stock. Barclays says it's overweight. Don't buy it. UBS says don't buy it. It's neutral. Bank of America, don't buy it. Morgan Stanley, don't buy it. So Facebook is going down. In lieu of that, here's another article. It says Facebook censors gospel group's music video for political content. So they took this gospel music group off Facebook just because they decided to do it. Now, I think that Facebook needs to reconsider taking all Christians off of Facebook because they're losing customers. Now, that's why their stock went down. So maybe they're going to start begging us to come back on. They need to beg because it's really a farce when you think about it. And by the way, young people are not really using Facebook anymore. Facebook is being used by the older generation. I'd like to rename it Wrinkle Book. That's just me. Canada forces Christians into the closet. You ready for this one? Under religion. Between its progressive history, Canada's Supreme Court, and a far-left leader, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, our northern neighbors are gradually forcing Christians into the closet. But before you say that can never happen in America, or as long as it doesn't affect me, let's look at 3 disturbing news stories. 1, just across the U.S.-Canadian border, a Christian bus driver was arrested and charged with a hate crime for evangelizing. Bill Watcott gave out gospel pamphlets at a pride parade saying homosexuality can lead to diseases, which it can. And Jesus can save gay people, which he can, if they repent for their sins, which he can. So the gay community went wild on it, and the 51-year-old Christian man was charged with willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group, namely the gay community. Apparently, they've interpreted John 3:16 to suggest that God doesn't love everybody and salvation is not for everybody. The LGBTQ community's out. But the Bible's true, and every word can be trusted. So if you and I love our neighbors, whether they live down the street or across the Canadian border, the love of Christ compels us to tell them the good news. That's what we're supposed to do. And they can be forgiven and they can be saved. It's not up to us to convict or force them to receive the truth. We're just the messengers. Bill Walcott was not only fired from his job, but he faces now 2 years in prison as well, just because he told somebody that Jesus can save them. So if you missed this earlier, Ontario province now allows people born there to remove male or female from their birth certificates and opt for a non-binary or unknown gender designation. I want to tell you a story here, but I probably shouldn't. Well, I'm going to tell you one. When I was a pastor of Cathedral, my church, one of the first couple of years, there was a woman that came into the women's group, and she was about 6'2", and she came in, and the women, she said that she needed money for some of her medical supplies and medical prescriptions, and the women just took to her like crazy, and basically she became the one that they wanted to help, and so should we help people who have needs. Well, they were giving her money, they were giving her furniture, they were giving all kinds of things. So they said that she really needed to come and talk to me, the pastor. So she came into my room, into my office, and as soon as she came into my office, she said, "Hello, Pastor." I said, "Why are you posing as a female when you're male?" And she looked at me and she said, "What?" I said, "Why are you posing as a female when you are a male?" She says, "I'm not a male, I'm a female." I said, "No, you're a male." I said, "You have an Adam's apple. I've never seen a female with an Adam's apple." Was protruding. And she said, "I'm not." I finally got it out of her that all the medication was to get her sex change operation. She had duped these women in the church, and some of you are here probably remember this. She had duped the women in the church for all of it, and I said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring me," and she was swearing up and down, not just at me, that she was born a female. So I said, "Here's what I want." I said, "You want this money for your medication? I'd be willing to give you the money for your medication if it's legitimate medication. I want your doctor to give me a copy of your birth certificate." And she said, "I'm not going to do that." And I said, "Okay. If this law was in effect, her birth certificate would have said not male and not female." That's what we're talking about. That's one of the reasons why I told you that. So, also, we know that Canada's Supreme Court recently ruled 7-2 against a Christian college, which is a law college, Trinity University, and they can't graduate their men and women with law degrees. They went all those years and they can't graduate them because they believe in their doctrine that marriage is between one man and one woman. How many believe that? Well, they're being ostracized for it. But don't be too quick to bash Canadians, it says. Americans have gradually allowed discrimination against Christians in our own education system. So it would be foolish and naive to think religious intolerance won't increase in the United States. It's another sign of the times. You're going to see the love of many waxing cold. So finally, a judge in Canada has officially declared 2 men and a woman parents of 1 child on the child's birth certificate. The unmarried threesome are in a relationship known as polyamory, which means you can live with several different people and have a relationship. The judge's reasoning, he says, times have changed. Let me tell this judge what hasn't changed. God's word. It hasn't changed. Times may change, but God's word hasn't changed. It's what we govern ourselves by. Wanting no accountability, wanting no relativism. We believe, the people today are believing that they're their own God. I have my own little theory on this, my own little nomenclature I want to put on it. We've been talking about evolution in schools for decades now, and we've been talking about the evolutionary theory, but we don't teach it as a theory. We teach it as fact. And so all these kids grew up with evolution. Well, this is, I call, social Darwinism. Darwin is the one that gave physical, tried to get physical credence, which he didn't, to evolution. But this is social Darwinism. You see, if you believe you're evolving into someone, then basically, and if you believe in evolution, you don't believe in a supreme being. If you don't believe in a supreme being, then you don't have any laws that govern you, and you are a law unto yourself. How many are following this? So being a law unto yourself, you actually become your own God. And that's what we're seeing. I believe this is the right way, so that's why I'm doing it. And they fly in the face of God himself. Let me give you a little bit more. I know it's going long tonight, but let me give you a little bit about religion. That is the Vatican. Several of you will be there. I don't want to reemphasize to you, but I'm going to tell you right now that Roman Catholicism, this is going out, and I'm going to get emails, and that's fine. This is a woman's womb. This is a phallic symbol. It's the Babylonian occultism. Catholicism has taken on they've taken on the Babylonian practice of it. And it's not just there. It's a lot of ways, all the way down, from mother and child worship to the fish hat that the Pope wears, to the fish tails for Dagon, the Babylonian god. So basically, Catholicism has some roots in it, I'm saying roots, that really are from paganism. Now, that doesn't mean every Catholic is going to hell. They have the Bible that you have. It's a Douay version of the Bible. They have 16 extra books in it called the Apocrypha. But they have every single book you have in it. In your Bible, they have John 3:16 in your Bible. So here's what's happening. When I grew up as a Catholic, I was told not to play with Protestants. Now I are one. But I was told I couldn't play with Protestants. So it was no for me to go into a Protestant church. We were divided. The Catholics believed we were departed brethren, that we didn't have anything to do with them. Well, the Pope right now, this week, Pope Francis made a highly anticipated visit to the World Council of Churches and to the headquarters in Geneva. And what he's talking about is pulling Catholicism and Protestantism back together under one universal church. By the way, the word Catholic means universal. It doesn't just mean Roman Catholic, it means universal. So he's saying now is the time for both of these churches to come together, both all the Protestants and the Catholics. Now, I have some people who write to me that think that this would be an amazing thing for us. This would be the worst thing in the world for us, because that's the one world church that John talks about. I have never, ever, and I grew up as a Catholic, ever heard anything near that. And now he's trying to push that. And of course, there's a lot of people in Protestantism that would love it, just to bring it back, bring that schism back. But when you do that, something's going to change. So when I tell you that we're very, very close, we're very, very close. Let me give you this one. Just two more. You still with me tonight? Yes. This is plastic. I've been telling you some articles about, I think it was in England, McDonald's are not using plastic straws anymore. They're using cardboard straws. I think Starbucks are using cardboard straws. That's not going to help the problem. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's probably part of it, but it's not going to help the problem. The amount of plastic waste in our environment is skyrocketing worldwide, and it's having devastating impact in Thailand. A pilot whale recently died after swallowing more than 80 plastic bags. Experts estimate that over 100,000 marine animals die each year as a result of plastic ingestion. In 2018, world plastic production will reach 360 million tons, a level some believe will nearly double by 2030. Once plastic reaches the environment, it enters our food chain, where increasingly microplastic particles are turning up in our stomachs, blood, and lungs. Now, plastic is a derivative of petroleum, and so petroleum is a carcinogen. Carcinogens give you cancer. So when you wonder why there's so much cancer, it's because of plastics. We're breathing it and reading it. So they're most likely to transmit plastics to humans in shellfish, seafood, and mussels and other mollusks, because we eat the digestive systems of these sea creatures. Plastics also make their way into the groundwater, into soil. To put the situation in context, some researchers suggest that by 2050, the ocean will contain more plastic by weight than fish. Plastic is versatile and very useful. It's also harmful, and it's also a hallmark of a throwaway society. When humans were placed on the earth, God gave them specific commands to be good stewards of the environment. Genesis tells us that. Today, humanity has neglected the important responsibility, and we're told that the whole creation right now is groaning in agony, Romans 8:22. Thankfully, the creation itself will be renewed. When Christ comes back, he will make all things new, and nobody will ever have to worry about plastic pollution anymore. But I'm telling you, I have grandchildren, and I'm really concerned on the grandchildren and what new things they're going to see with the technology, especially diseases that are coming. There's a blood moon coming. I didn't say this last night, but I'm going to tell you. Blood moon prophecy is coming. Some people are predicting the end of the world. Blood moon will dominate the United Kingdom skies this week, and there are some who believe that it's a bit more than a lunar phenomenon. What is a blood moon prophecy, and why do some conspiracy theorists think it's the end of the world? Well, Friday, July 27th, treated the longest blood moon on the 21st century. It'll last a whopping 1 hour and 43 minutes. There will be a second blood moon of the year, and it will be the second blood moon of the year. It would also be the closest Mars has been to the Earth in 15 years. So anybody who's watching the phenomenon that's happening in the skies realizes that in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been some things happening that are unprecedented. So what's a blood moon prophecy? Well, it's a set of apocalyptic beliefs, and there are people coming out right now saying that the end of the world is going to happen. Matter of fact, one man who started to even talk about the blood moon was a man that I've met. He was actually in the movie that I did, and basically he has said that the blood moon was going to bring the end of the world. The blood moon, I'm going to tell you right now, the world's not going to end on, let me give you the date. Tomorrow it's not going to end. You know why? You know why I say that? Because what if I told you, well, tomorrow the world's going to end and we're going to be raptured, and I was wrong? What will happen? My credibility goes right down the hill. So I have nothing to lose by telling you it's not going to happen tomorrow, and everything to gain. Do you think when you're raptured you're going to look at me and say, you were right? You're not going to say it. So here's the deal. Can the world end tomorrow? Can Jesus come back? Yes, of course. He can come back tonight. So I don't believe in anyone should ever tell you a date. And by the way, Mark Blitz, when he came up with the 4 blood moons, said that the world was going to end in 2015. It did not end. People still buy his books. So just listen to me. I'm telling you, you have to understand, there's a phenomenon going on, and something is happening, and it's usually towards Israel. I believe this one is about England, United Kingdom, because we're watching the United Kingdom go through some troubles. So they all mean something. You only know what they mean most of the time in an afterthought when you look back at it. And you'll see that in your Psalm study tonight. And so they're all wrong because basically they're setting dates, and we're not supposed to. Okay, lastly, and I know you're ready. Want some good news? Good news is it's not going to end tomorrow. No, here's some good news. What would cause most Americans to switch churches? I'm not going to read this all to you, but they did a survey, exhaustive survey. The reason why people want to go to church today and stay in a church, not just church hop, is because they want in-depth Bible teaching. So why do you think you're here on Thursday nights? Because people seek out in-depth Bible preaching and teaching. It's the number one reason why people go to church. They said all the other churches today in America, a lot of the churches that are not preaching Bible and are not teaching it will have people come in for fads, and they will leave generally after 3 to 5 years. And so what we need is the Word of God. That's what we need. We don't need silliness. We need the Word of God. We don't need fads. We need the Word of God. That's in the news tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers that they come forward, and I know I take on a long time, but that's okay. We're not going to have study next week, so I'm making up for it.